Welcome one, welcome all to another stellar episode of .NET Rocks, the internet audio talk show for .NET developers. I'm your host in New London, Connecticut, Carl Franklin, and my co-host in Atlanta, Georgia, with the flu, who sounds like a blues singer. Will you please welcome Saturated Fats?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm recovering.
You're almost ready? You're almost better.
Yeah, that's right. I had dinner at Wendy's tonight, so Saturated Fats fits pretty well.
So what's up, Mark?
Oh man, not much. I've kind of been under the weather this week, so I'm not sure what's going on in the world.
Not much. You're not missing anything.
Yeah, good to hear.
Well,
so Microsoft hasn't changed the name of anything this week, huh?
Well, as a matter of fact, yeah, they're in the middle of well, they're not in the middle. They're on the forefront of a rebranding push that always sends chills up and down my spine when I hear the word rebranding, especially when I think about all the time and effort that I've put into, being a .NET brand. But let me just give you the skinny. This is important stuff, people. What Microsoft has decided is that the .NET name is too diluted, and they're right. It is very diluted. They have been using it everywhere. They've been using it as a ubiquitous term for this new technology, this new framework, as the development environment, Visual Basic.NET, the language. They've been using it for their servers.
Are they going to rename Notepad .NET Notepad?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, the whole idea is that they want to take the words .NET out of things that don't have anything to do with web services. And I have mixed feelings about this. I'll tell you the truth, and a lot of people do. I'm trusting that they're going to make the right decision. Of course, it means a little more work for us. I think really it's not for developers, this rebranding. Developers are always going to call, and then .NET handles the memory, they're always going to say things like that. And I don't think there's anything Microsoft can do to change that colloquial language. But the problem is in selling, what .NET is, they've muddied the waters by using it everywhere. So they want to refocus that on just using the .NET framework with web services. That's going to be called .NET. So they're pointing the word .NET more to web services than they are to the framework. Right. Now, it's still going to be called the .NET framework. Okay? I know it's a little confusing, and I wouldn't be surprised if... But here's the epitome of confusing. I got an email from somebody who read an InfoWorld article about this saying, so VBNet's going away? So they're completely rewriting .NET? People don't get it. They don't, especially developers. They hear stuff like .NET is changing, and they think technical. And here's the thing, folks. Nothing is changing technically. The only thing that's changing is Microsoft's what they call things. And that's going to change. And probably the best argument I've heard out of Redmond for this rebranding comes from thinking about Longhorn. Longhorn is the code name for the version of Windows that comes after XP Server, where the framework, what we call the .NET framework, I guess it's still called the .NET framework, is built into the operating system. So those things that we get as a benefit from targeting applications to the framework are now features of Windows, not features of .NET. You understand? So it's going to cause some serious mayhem. And right. I think all of us in the developer community have a duty to clarify to business people and to other developers that nothing technically is changing, nothing's going away. The language VB.NET isn't going away. Microsoft is just refocusing what they use the .NET moniker to identify. So I'm sure you're going to hear more about that in the future. We certainly have been beating the drum of, lousy marketing here a little bit, maybe a little bit too much, I don't know. But we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see what happens. So, Mark, you said you had been out of the loop lately on world events?
Yeah, man, I've just been kind of hanging out in the bed trying to get well.
So our guest tonight is, if I could quickly shift gears to the show, is Paul Sheriff. He's a Microsoft certified pro. He's considered one of the leading VB programmers in the industry. He writes many articles a year for several magazines on VB, SQL Server, and web development. Very much into ASP.NET right now. Also speaks at conferences all over the place, including Tech Ed, Microsoft Developer Days. He's spoken at lots of places, and he's also done over 70 training videos on VB,
Wow.
SQL Server, and web development. You can access his website at www.pdsa.com. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, thanks, guys. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you with us, Paul.
Absolutely.
So where are you at tonight, Paul?
I'm out in Southern California. That's my home base here. Actually up at my good friend's Ken Getz, who I know has also been on your show.
Yeah.
He kindly loaned me his office tonight. So.
Hey, Ken, how are you, if you're listening out there?
Ken's actually out. He's out having dinner, so.
As well he should this time of night.
Yeah.
That's good. So where in Southern California? I used to live out there.
Well, actually, I live down in Orange County, actually in Irvine.
Oh, cool.
And, just happened to be up in L.A. today teaching, so I just stopped up here because Ken was just about 15 minutes from there, and it made it easier for me just to get to a landline for you guys.
Awesome.
Cool. What are you teaching this week, Paul?
Teaching at L.A. County Assessor's Office. They're learning about ASP.NET, so I'm actually doing a 5-day class there for them.
Terrific.
Yeah, cool topic.
Yeah.
Terrific. Yeah, I used to live in the San Bernardino area, Loma Linda.
Yep, know where that is.
I lived there for 2 weeks before I realized there were mountains. It's an amazing experience. You know, everybody seems to have a little respiratory problem there. I didn't know anybody who didn't wheeze.
That is probably true, yep.
But I enjoyed it while I lived there. So, what are there's a lot of training that we've been talking about. You're doing training this week, but you do development as well. What are some of the types of .NET applications you've done?
Well, I got into .NET personally back in the Beta 1 days, so it's been about, 2.5 years now. Wow, time flies, doesn't it? And since then, I've developed, quite a bit of training material and really dived into it a lot. But, our major focus at our company is outsourcing. So we actually do a lot of applications for many different clients. And we had a lot of clients jump into Beta 2 and did some early adopter stuff. And most of it was ASP.NET apps. We've done about 8, I think. Yeah, probably about 8 big ASP.NET installations and 2 desktop applications, one with web services, which was kind of fun. So just a lot of different things for, Transamerica, let's see, where else we do? Auto Club. We actually did an integration with eBay, which was kind of fun.
Oh, nice. Using web services, obviously?
Actually, that one was just really a site. They have a little link off of their site that people can go to if they're trying to verify the authenticity of, like, a baseball that's for sale up there.
Huh.
And so it's kind of interesting. They passed us information. We would, pass that information on to an authenticator who would actually authenticate that the baseball was real right online. It was
Very
pretty
cool.
Neat.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Do you have a lot of success stories then from people that you've taught and people that you've worked for?
Absolutely. I mean, we actually publish a lot of case studies right on our website. So, you can always check out our website there. We have it under customers. There's a link for case studies. And we actually write up a little case study, short. They're like 2 pages that just kind of describe the technology, what we did, the business problem, and talk about some of the things that we use to help them solve their problems. Usually we're working with their teams, right? I mean, because we're going in, and they've got an IT department, and we're just kind of helping them, assisting them with architecture because, everybody being new to .NET, they really want to approach it the right way.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, I've got kind of a multi-pronged question for you. Having developed a lot of applications already, one thing that I remember from looking at your website quite a while back, you had a sort of a framework out there, or a shell that worked well for developing client-server applications with VB and SQL Server. Have any best practices kind of emerged from the work you've done with .NET? And the second part is, do you plan to develop a similar framework for .NET apps?
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody who knows me knows if they take one of my training classes, I'm going to really push standards on people and really architecture and kind of the best ways to do things, because that's what we do. I learn by going in and working with a lot of clients and developing applications. And as you guys know, when you do that, you really learn probably a lot more than the customer does, really.
Sure,
Right.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what makes it really fun. And then what I'm really good at is taking that and then really making it into a design pattern. Okay, so I do that, and that's what I did before. I had frameworks, I had tool sets that helped us generate code, and obviously we've done that same thing in .NET now. After 2.5 years of working with this, we have found out about a lot of the best practices, things you do for the maximum flexibility on a web app, maximum performance, how to cut size down if you're on a slow WAN. We've had that happen several times. And so it's a lot of these things. We've put together a .NET framework, and actually it's up on our website again. You can actually go there. It's called the PDSA .NET Productivity Framework.
Very cool.
Yeah, exactly. It helps people get started a lot quicker than you'd be able to from scratch, yeah.
Well, that's
Great.
excellent, Paul.
What do you think of the application blocks that Microsoft is doing?
You know, actually, it's kind of funny because, like, the data access application block that they put out, I think that was like the first one they put out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, unfortunately, I'd already developed my own
Yeah.
before that came out, but I did the same thing, yeah. So you wrap up ADO.NET, because that really is a good thing to do. I mean, hey, you guys have been around for a while. How many,
Sure.
We've been through VB SQL, ODBC API, ADO, RDO. How many O's have we been through?
Yeah. It's
Oh,
true.
too many.
Oh, too many. That's right. And, we're probably going to see some other stuff, and we're probably going to see some changes to ADO.NET. And what I'm trying to do always is, hey, isolate that code away, right, so that if something does change, you just have to change it in one place.
Of course.
And that's why I like their application blocks, because they are guiding people now towards that type of philosophy. And I think that's a great philosophy to have.
Sure. It's good to just have some good sample code out there, too. I learn a lot from samples.
Absolutely. I think most developers learn best by looking at other people's code.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. And unlike a lot of Microsoft stuff sometimes, that stuff I found very well documented and pretty decently written, actually.
You have done a lot of work with ASP.NET. What are some kind of tips you can give the listeners for, laying out pages for flexibility, special methods that you place into each page, or any kind of design patterns that you can share with us?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, if we take kind of your first thing there, I think maximum flexibility, right? How do you really architect a website because as we all know, websites change, and they should change, right? You want people to come back and see something new. And that's a problem because, you only got so many resources to throw at a website and then so many resources to help maintain it. And one of the things that we always make sure we're doing for each of our websites is we're taking advantage of user controls and server controls. User controls are fantastic for things like headers.
Right.
If you got a standard header that runs across every page. Perfect example of where to use a user control. And then your left navigation area.
Right.
Okay, again, that's an area that can change, right? So you stick in a user control there, and now that sits on every page. And if you want to make a change, you make the change in one place in that user control. Kind of goes to that same philosophy we were just talking about, right? Wrapping stuff up so that you only go to one place.
Yeah, there's not really a reason to use server-side includes anymore now, is there?
A user control is really better.
Yeah, I look at a user control as a server-side include on steroids.
Right.
Okay.
As a programmable object.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you know what? I don't like the name user controls. Remember in the beta days, they called it a pagelet.
Yeah.
I like that name because that really describes more of what it is. It's a portion of a page.
I do wish, however, you could get to it without having to find it. If you could just access the control by its instantiated name.
Yeah, because when you drag that user control on that page, you do have to go in and add the variable yourself if you want to access it.
Right.
Yeah.
Little things like that, I find, can be barriers to getting stuff done.
Right. And you got to remember,
that's why we're
control.
here. That's right.
Exactly. But you also got to remember, user controls, are really for a particular site.
Yes.
And so that's something that you always got to be aware of. So if you have something that's very site-specific, user controls are wonderful. However, server controls, right, those are the ones where those are DLLs, and those can be used across multiple sites. Okay, and taking good advantage of those things. We wrote one for a bank one time, a server control, because they had some very specific security requirements. I mean, being a bank, they're going to be really checking for things like SQL injection attacks, for example, right? Or things like somebody passing show data on the URL line, or anything else that could, trying to pass in an exe name, for example, in an input box.
Right.
Okay? So that's an excellent example of a very good reusable server control that you can build to filter out all of that and check for all of that. So instead of using the regular text box from ASP.NET, inherit from it, create a server control, and do all of those checks, right in the code. And that you can use all over the place on every application you develop within that bank.
Good advice.
Yeah, so those are some of the things that we've kind of, come up with for making sure we have maximum flexibility, being able to change things in one place, and it affects the whole website. Yeah.
What about performance with output caching? Have you done much with user controls and setting the attribute up to have them output cached?
Oh yeah, that's especially prevalent for user controls that don't change, that are pretty static. You definitely want to take advantage of the output cache directive. Okay, because user controls, we typically use for things like our headers, our left nav, and stuff like that, and by caching that information, obviously that saves a lot of processing time on the server.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point.
One thing when I teach that immediately makes sense to everyone.
When I explain how output caching works, the light bulbs go on. That's not a hard sell to get across.
Yeah, it's the easiest way that you can make your app more scalable. Fastest and easiest way.
Absolutely.
Hey, Paul, I like to point out in my classes some things that necessarily don't work as you'd expect them to. Are there any sort of gotchas or tips about working with ASP.NET that where, you found something that might have been a little bit non-intuitive that you can sort of help our listeners get around?
Oh, yeah. There's a couple of different areas where there's a couple gotchas that if you're not careful, I'm sure everybody's hit this at one time. You're programming along, everything's working great, and you go to lunch and you come back, and all of a sudden that same piece of code that was working before is now not working.
Yeah.
Boy, you pull your hair out trying to figure this out, right? Okay? Then you do all the normal
stuff.
Say,
what did I eat?
Yeah, what did I eat?
Yeah, it's Taco Bell.
Oh, no.
That's right. Got some of that taco sauce on the keyboard, and that was it, man. Got into the my little data card there, and it's gone.
You're hosed.
Yeah. So you do the normal stuff, right? You shut down Visual Studio, and you hope that's going to help it, and it doesn't. So, there's a couple areas, and I actually wonder if I think I may have documented this at one time. I'm going to try to pull that documentation. I'll get it to you guys so you can put it on your website. Okay. But
great.
One of the things, there's two areas, and that is your VS Web Cache folder, okay, which is under Tools Options in VisualStudio.net. You can set up the location of your VS Web Cache. Okay, now what that does is basically when you're in the development mode, they cache a whole bunch of kind of intermediary stuff out there. And sometimes it just gets a little corrupted. It gets off a little bit from what's in your project versus what's in the web cache. So what you do is you find out where that VS Web Cache folder is located, and I believe it's stored by default under your C:, Documents and Settings, your username, VisualStudio.net, right, all of that stuff.
Right.
Okay? Clear that out. Just delete the whole folder. Okay? No harm, no foul. It doesn't matter, and VisualStudio.net will rebuild it for you. Okay?
Very cool.
So I think that is probably one of the biggest areas where you'll find stuff. And by the way, kind of while we're on that, just your temp folder. Right?
Yeah.
Does everybody know where their temp folder is located? You got to clean that
critical.
out. Boy, I'll tell you, I went to a guy's house the other day. He had like 800 files in his temp folder because he hadn't cleaned it out ever. You know, and that one can help you too.
Well, your programs are supposed to clean them up, but sometimes they don't.
Yeah, installations are really bad about that.
Absolutely.
Sometimes. Yeah. And then the other area for also your cleanup is also the temporary ASP.NET files.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that's another area that sometimes will just get out of sync, and that can cause little problems. And that one's usually located under your Windows folder, under Microsoft.NET, framework, version number, and then temporary ASP.NET files. Again, just restart your web service, okay, and then you can kill that folder, and it'll rebuild it next time.
Right, I got very interested at one point, and in how ASP.NET was able to not require you to restart IIS whenever you
deploy a new DLL.
And the more I looked into it, I found that IIS is actually grabbing a copy of that DLL that sits out in that very folder that you mentioned.
Yep, that's exactly how it works, right? Because that way the DLL that you have in your folder, in your bin folder, okay, that's why you can always replace it, and all they're doing is copying it over and compiling everything over there, right? And then what happens is they're just doing some time checking, date and time checking and version checking, aren't they?
Well, I'm very grateful to the ASP.NET team that I don't have to run IIS reset every time I
compile a DLL.
Exactly.
However, that ASP Reg IIS exe that comes with the framework, boy, I've been swearing by that a lot. I'll go to a site and I'll do a class like you have, I'm sure, Paul. Some places where you go to do a class, they let you bring your own computers and everything's great because they're all going to work. But and I always try to talk people into that where we bring laptops. But typically you get, all the developers are going to bring their own laptops. And that's a nightmare.
Right.
Exactly.
And, some people have installed ASP, then they install IIS, or they don't install things correctly. And they go to develop a web page and it doesn't work, and they get debugger security problems, and that this doesn't work and that doesn't work. I'm sure you found that, Paul.
Absolutely.
When you're teaching the Reg util, the ASP Reg IIS exe tool is your fix-all for those kinds of problems.
Yep. Yeah, that copies over all those UI, the web UI validation scripts and all of that. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, before I discovered that, and I actually found that, Carl, when I attended one of the early master classes that you did.
Right.
Prior to that, I had just been reinstalling .NET completely.
Yeah, me too. Reinstalling the framework. Hey, Carl here. I was just flipping through MSDN Magazine in the March issue, and since we're talking about ASP.NET with Paul Sheriff, I thought I'd mention a great article under the ASP.NET column heading, 9 Options for Managing Persistent User State in Your ASP.NET Application by Stephen A. Smith. And he talks about using the application object, cookies, putting a hidden form field in the form, in the HTML form, using the query string object, the sessions, using new state containers in ASP.NET, using the cache, using a context object, using viewstate, using web config and machine config files, and all the differences in performance and in options and flexibility that you get with them. So if you're concerned about maintaining state and its effects on performance, check it out. You can also check it out online right now for free at msdn.microsoft.com/msdnmag, and go to the current issue to the ASP.NET column, and there you'll see it under Features, ASP.NET. Now let's get back to our show with Paul Sheriff talking about more ASP.NET features and tips and tricks right here on .NET Rocks. Don't you go away. What about exceptions? Exceptions are difficult to deal with in the web because you don't have that real-time exception object flowing down to the client where you can work with it and all that. What's your strategy for dealing with exceptions?
Yeah, good question. And that actually kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, right? Those Microsoft application blocks.
Sure.
Because that was the second one they released. And these application blocks, by the way, folks, you can find out there. Just do a search on msdn.microsoft.com, and you can actually find just search on application blocks, and you'll see they're kind of over under the architecture group. They're the group actually releasing these.
We're actually going to have somebody from that group on the show here soon.
Oh, fantastic.
Talking about them.
Are they call them Blue Bricks? Is that?
That's it.
Yeah, Blue Bricks. Yeah, they got like 3 more that are going to be coming out this summer.
Yeah.
For the new version, VSNet 2003. So that'll be kind of fun to look forward to.
What do you think of that? What do you think of VS 2003?
Oh, I love it. I think they've made a lot of great enhancements there.
Yeah, me too.
Are you doing anything with the compact framework, programming things like IPACs yet?
We actually haven't had any clients really requesting into those. I mean, we've done a couple of little things just so we are familiar with what to do, but we actually haven't had any clients ask us for that yet. So, no, we haven't actually done anything.
I always suggest when I'm dealing with architecture people about designing a system, I always suggest just ask them if they can see how using a mobile device, if they could have a seamless programming environment for it, could they take advantage of that? I don't think a lot of people think of it as a tool that's an option for them, and that's why you don't see a lot of adaptation. I think you have to be a little creative to come up with a use for them.
Yeah, there's some places that are really good for, you're out on an inventory floor or something.
Hospitals.
Some of those hospitals are great. Yeah, anything like that.
Well, before I got you off on the mobile computing tangent, Paul, you were about to tell us about the exceptions block.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, we use that. We really took that to heart. What they do is they give you an exception handler that is a default publisher, and this publishes by default to the NT event log, which you can hit problems with ASP.NET apps, by the way, because if ASP.NET doesn't generally have rights to create a new event source, because that does require writing to the registry.
I found event logs have problems anyway, even in Windows Forms.
Yeah, so that's one of those other little gotchas there. But what we did is we took that whole exception handler and we added on a bunch of our own classes. So we got the ability to write to a SQL Server table, the ability to write to a file, and the ability, which is a great one, write to email.
Cool.
Yeah, again, it's a design pattern you set up. So the first line in your catch block is always exceptionmanager.publish. And what that does is it loops through your config file and finds these entries and says which publishers are on that I can publish to. So I can turn them on and off, at my whim, basically. But I'll tell you, one of the coolest ones to do is the email one. Because here was a scenario we did. We had a client who was testing out our application remotely, so they were at their site. But what we did is we turned on the email capability. So what was happening is they were running, they would get errors. Okay, we told them, hey, just record all your errors. But we were already getting the exceptions in our email, and we were fixing them. So by the time they came back to us with the list of exceptions, we'd already fixed them.
Yeah. I don't like to blow my own horn, but that's a trick that I discovered about the same time I discovered email. That was a really, really good use for internet programming.
Yep.
Is sending exception information to the developers by email.
Yeah, that's great. That's really cool.
Very,
what's really
very
nice
cool.
is these application blocks give you a nice design pattern again, Now, you still have to report the user back to the error, the error back to the user at some point, right? You still got to get it on that web page, and so you'll have to come up with some way to do that as well.
Some big honking red label.
Publishing.
Some big honking red label or something.
Exactly.
Whistling.
Are
and
you using
spinning.
the error event to catch things in global ASAX file?
Yeah, good question. I mean, there's so many different ways. I mean, what do you do? I mean, obviously, hopefully, you're still using try and catch, okay? But what happens if you forget a try and catch or something you weren't expecting, and you do get an unhandled exception in your page?
They're ugly.
Yeah, they are.
Ooh.
There's a lot of ways to handle that, right? One of the things you can do is create your own base page class. All right, what does that mean? Well, you know how at the top of every class that you create in your web form, it says inherits system.web.ui.page, right?
Right.
Okay, well, just like anything in .NET, we can inherit from that. Okay, so what you do is you create your own base page class that inherits from that, and you override the on-error event. Okay, and then in the on-error event, what do? You call the exception manager.publish. Okay,
Very
and then
cool.
you call back to the regular on-error, and then what you can do is put in the custom errors element inside of your web config to redirect to a specific page. Okay, and then in that page, that way you never get the the really ugly page we've all gotten before when you get an error. Yeah.
Sure.
You can override that so the user would never see that. They'd see a nice page, okay, that says, hey, we're sorry, we can't process your request right now because you're an idiot. No, I'm just kidding. Wouldn't our jobs be so much easier without users?
If we could just be honest. Right. All right. First of all, put the crack pipe down. Second of all, no. Do you find yourself using data readers for binding with ASP.NET more than you use data sets, or a good mix of both, or what's the deal there?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's been so much talk about this. Which way do you go? Do you use a data set? Do you use a data reader? And really, it actually, we use both, to tell you the truth. Data readers are great for, hey, I got to blast through and load up a drop-down list here. I got to load up a data grid. okay, very quickly. A data reader is always going to be a little faster than a data set. I mean, I find generally about 20-25% speed difference between the two. So it's
right.
It can be significant depending on what you're doing. Okay, so that's great for that type of stuff. But a lot of times, okay, how many times have you seen this scenario? I'm loading up state codes, right, into this drop down over here on this page and this page and this page and this page. So I got 5 places I'm loading up state codes. Well, I don't want to go back to the database every time.
Sure.
So that's an excellent use of a data set, right?
As a cache.
Grab it.
Yeah,
put it in the data set and cache that baby, right?
Right.
Very cool. Also, I would imagine use data sets if you need to update. If you're just reading data once, sure, pull it out in a data reader.
Right.
But if you want to do any updates, of course.
Are you using the cache object to cache your data sets?
I was just going to ask that question, Mark.
Yeah,
I've seen that done, and I used to do it myself, and it's very quick. But does it scale? Are we going to have any problems if everybody uses the data set and the cache object?
Well, again, you got to kind of look at the various ways there are to cache data, right? Where can you put data? I mean, when you need to keep it around, right? I mean, there's the session object, there's the application object, there's the cache object. You could actually write it out to a SQL Server table too, really, for that matter.
Sure.
Okay. It's kind of silly. Read something from SQL Server and put it back in there, but I've seen it done. And really it kind of comes down to what you need, okay, and how long you want that data to be around. And let's talk about like session for a minute, right? If you put a data set in session and you forget about it, okay, that thing's going to live until the user gets off of that application. If that's quite a large data set, you're taking up a lot of memory on that server, aren't you?
Times the number of users. Yeah.
That's right. One of the things now session's great because it is per user. The cache object, just like the application object, is application-wide, right? Okay. Well, with the cache object, one of the things you can do is you can add data with a key value. The key value could actually be the session ID. So now you got it back to per user again, don't you?
Yeah.
One of the great things about the cache object is you can actually time it out. You can put a time span on it and say, hey, keep this data around for the next 5 minutes, okay? And then if nobody hits it again, nobody uses it again, and just get rid of it. So now you're not waiting for the session to time out to get rid of that memory, okay? The cache is taking care of that for you. So that's kind of a neat technique to take advantage of.
Well, back to my question about performance and about all those. Let's say we have 20, 30 simultaneous users, and I have a data set and a cache object. There's one data set, and all of the different users are reading from it and updating and writing. I know it's thread safe. You don't have to lock it before you use data in the cache. That's very cool. But is that going to be a bottleneck? Is that going to be a performance issue?
Yeah, I mean, there's always that potential for that, and that's why I said you got to kind of look at the usage of that cache object, right? Because that's one of the scenarios where, anytime you're going after a single object, just like you're going after the application object,
right? Okay,
that could be a potential bottleneck.
So you want to do some definite performance testing. Have you seen any other performance testers, or what am I trying to say? Have you seen any other testing utilities besides the one that comes with Visual Studio? I know I've used Ants by Redgate, and I think it's great.
Awesome tool.
Have you seen any others that you like?
Not really. I mean, we've been using the one that comes with .NET, hooking up a lot of our own performance monitors. In a lot of cases, we use just Perfmon, and that seems to, I'm usually able to performance tune pretty well with that. So
cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, what about, let's say we have some big data sets that we're using in an ASP.NET application, or even a Windows application for that matter, with web service or remoting or something. What kind of best practices do you have, or tips or advice you can give the listener as to economize the data that's going across the network?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, a couple things there, right? I mean, number one, you got to look at trying to avoid things like select asterisk, right? I mean, when you only need 2 columns, hey, don't send a select asterisk down because you get all columns. So that would help limit things, right? Common techniques that we've done is, I know a lot of people will just load up a drop-down list with all the values when really the user is never going to scroll through all of them. They really kind of have a good idea of, hey, I'm really looking for something that's in the A category. Okay, so they might give them a little text box and let them type in the first couple letters, then post back, or if you're on a WinForms app, send down a like. Hey, give me all records where the field name is like A, and then %, right? Use a wildcard because that limits a lot of that data. Okay?
Sure.
One of the things, we just ran into this, and just kind of reminded me here. We just ran into this at a company that has a wide area network, and they have a very small pipe. Okay, now I didn't know this at the time. They told us they had 128K, line for us, no big deal. Then I found out that, number one, it's for 80 users.
Oh, and they're using Access.
Big omission there, huh? And that wasn't even the worst of it. Half of the pipe was dedicated to mainframe traffic.
Oh.
Okay? Now I'm down to 64. Okay? So it's getting better. Then the mainframe is also burstable and has priority, so it can take up the rest of that.
Jeez.
In some cases, I was getting 3 to 10K throughput on this pipe for a web app.
Insane.
Okay? Now, let me ask you something. You ever gone in and had a data grid that you loaded up, right, and it comes over on your ASP.NET page, right? Have you ever gone in and done a view source?
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah. What's the biggest section that you see in there?
That would be the, starts with view and ends with state.
There you go. That view state, right? Okay. Now, you say, well, I got to have the view state because I'm doing sorting on the data grid, or I'm posting back, and I got to have it recreate that data, right? Okay. This one bit us because obviously I had a very small pipe to work with. Okay. I just happen to remember reading about 2 months ago in the February edition of MSDN magazine, Dino Esposito had a fantastic article on how to save the state on the server. Okay?
Yeah.
They built this into .NET. They realized this was going to be a problem. There are two methods that you take advantage of. There's load persistence, load view state from persistence medium and save state to persistence medium. Okay, these are built right in on the page class.
Cool.
All right? So again, all you have to do is override these methods, and you can then save the view state on the server. You could save it in a file, or, hey, use that cache object we were just talking about, right? And any of this can be done so easily. And guess what? When we did this, it cut the size of our pages by an average of 40%.
Wow.
Going out across that pipe. It was amazing.
That's great.
Yeah. So if you haven't seen it, I'll get the links for that too, you guys. But it's actually in the MSDN magazine, February 2003 edition.
MSDN magazine is incredible.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I love it.
And Dino always has great articles on stuff.
He does. He really puts a lot of thought into solutions and publishes solutions. He's always going way beyond just the technologies and simple demos. He's always picking really, really useful things to do with this stuff, which I like.
Yeah, he's pretty cool, and I've read a lot of his articles, and I just happen to remember this because it just happened actually 2 weeks ago. This kind of came up, with this client.
That's cool. Have you heard of people also serializing the web controls and saving those that way?
No, I haven't heard of that one.
I haven't either, but I just thought of it. I don't know if it's even possible. We're going to have to try it.
Yeah, I'm going to try that one.
I've been getting into serializing recently. I've actually did some work with a binary formatter, and it's easy to just take an object and serialize it to a stream, a memory stream, get an array of bytes out of it. I just did some looking, but what's interesting? If you serialize a data set with a binary formatter, and then you save that to a file, let's say, and you also just do a write XML, there isn't much difference. There really isn't much difference in the size, which was surprising to me. Interesting. So I'm always interested in compression. This is a good time for me to mention I found a great public domain compression library that Ingo Raymer points out in his excellent book on .NET remoting. In C# and VBNet, he has 2 books. And it works great. It's public domain. It's written in C#, comes with source, and it does zip-compatible compression, and it also does a whole bunch of other compatible compressions. But
we got to put the link up for that.
Yeah, we'll put the link up for that.
What's the guy's name? Michael Kruger, is that right?
Yeah, right. And I found that especially if you're using remoting or sockets or any of these things, that you can compress a data set and send it to a client, which can then decompress it and really get a significant performance benefit.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of those common sense things that
Absolutely.
it just seems apparent that we should somehow compress.
We got all this raw power on these PCs. It's not going to take any time at all to compress a data set.
Right.
And a zip format is a well-known, tested algorithm.
I swear they should put that into. I don't know. Are they putting compression into web services? Do you know, Paul?
I heard there was talk about that as one of the things definitely on the plates for the enhancements for web services.
God, I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah, that needs it.
It really is a dog.
There's a lot of things you can do also. I mean, if you're on a WAN, for example, like that's what this particular web application was, but on the WAN, you can also, in most cases, you can put on hardware compression.
Yeah.
And that was another problem that these guys had at this company is they didn't have their hardware compression on.
Yeah.
Right. Between routers, right?
Right.
So that, once they turned that on, that helped as well. So
now, if you remember back in the days of modems, it almost hurts me to say that, but back in the days of modems, the modems would do compression.
Yeah.
But that's not the default, with a 10BASE-T card.
But the same thing, you still want the compression even on the larger pipes as well because it does help.
Right. And it wasn't always an option before because the processors weren't able to keep up with it.
Yeah.
But now our hardware is far outperforming our software.
Yeah.
Hardware abounds. So what other optimization techniques do you recommend for ASP.NET or even ADO.NET for that matter?
Yeah. Well, we've learned a few things. Some of the most obvious ones are like, hey, let's use client-side script whenever possible, right? Just especially for all the validation stuff. I mean, it's great because .NET actually gave us controls that do that. Using things like the required field validator.
Right. Oh, the regular expression validator is incredible.
Oh, absolutely. I
love that.
Right. Because that just avoids so much post-backing, right? And that's a good optimization there.
Yeah.
Okay. One that's kind of funny is actually going back to viewstate a minute because what people don't realize is text boxes and checkboxes, for example, the viewstate is set on by default, and you never need it really on those. You hardly ever need it.
Yep, that's right.
So that would be another good optimization.
Labels, especially.
Yeah, exactly. Things like
just
that, right?
Have a one-time message or something.
Yeah. Or even if you just got like a simple image. I mean, there's no reason to use the image server control. Just use the HTML control. It renders the exact same thing.
Right.
Because HTML controls don't have to be instantiated as an object, whereas server controls do.
This is the first time somebody's mentioned the HTML controls that I can remember, Mark, on .NET Rocks.
Yeah, that's right.
Why don't you go ahead and tell the listener what those are?
Okay, well, basically a server control, as we all know, is under the Web Forms tab. Okay, and so those are the ones you drag and drop on. And you got to think about what's going on behind the scenes, right? What happens when the page renders, it has to dim an object for each one of those server controls that you've placed on the page. Think about a simple label. Think about a simple image control. Okay? Those are objects that then have to spin up and spit out. And what's the code it spins out? I'm sorry. It's just so basic, HTML 3.2 standard.
Yep.
And it's not going to do anything different for any browser. So you might as well use the HTML controls. Just go to the HTML control tab and drag those on instead.
And the properties are the model that the browser uses, right?
Right.
So the same properties you would access in JavaScript, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. If you're going to write dynamic HTML, you're going to need to do that anyway, right?
That's right.
That's correct. So, just little things like that can really save a lot of time. I think how many labels you could potentially put on a web page.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they're just generating a span. Well, come on. You can write that yourself. And it's funny, because I don't see a lot of people mentioning stuff like that. Okay.
Also, the fact that you can run them as server controls. So if you want to use a standard password field, for example, then you could just right-click on it and say Run as a server control. Then you get the events and you get the properties and things you could set.
That's correct.
Well, hey, I have an oddball question, Paul.
Okay.
So are you a grid layout or a flow layout kind of guy?
Oh, there's a good question. I'm a flow layout guy.
Cool.
Yeah.
One of us.
Is that what you use?
Well, anyone that came from ASP is going to be a flow layout kind of guy.
That's correct.
And this is another thing, Paul, that when I'm showing ASP.NET to people, I'm sure you get this too. The people who have never done web programming, or the people who have done ASP programming, maybe they've done some web programming, any kind of web programming, see ASP.NET and say, this is awesome.
Yep.
The people who have only done Windows programming say, yeah. So
yeah, like a big hairy deal.
What's the deal? What's the big deal? So you get a button with an event and you set a label text property.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't get it. Why is everybody so happy about this?
Right.
Well, I tell you one thing that I do, sometimes especially doing demos in class, I'll go ahead and leave it in grid layout, lay the page out, and then I'll go change the target schema. And instead of using absolute positioning, it'll go ahead and build tables for you. Have you looked into doing that at all?
Yeah. And why did you do that? Because I know why I do that, but why did you do that?
Well, just to cut down on having to generate all those tables and lay them out. I mean, it builds the table for you.
I didn't know it did that. Does it space them out accordingly?
Well, no, you can still run into to some layout problems with
Yeah.
it because it's not doing absolute positioning.
Okay.
So you wind up having to go back and edit usually the tables by hand a little bit, but it definitely saves you some time.
I generally tell people that we're going to use grid layout mode in the class because this is not a class in HTML design, and we could get so lost in the table editor. Oh my God,
Right.
we get so lost in the table editor we'd never get any code written. So that's what I tell people. I do show them flow layout mode, but to move the class along, I say we're going to use grid. But in the real world, problems. If you got large fonts.
Yep.
A client with large fonts, you're going to have overlapping fields.
Right.
It's not
Yep,
good.
And that's the number one problem right there. People use the grid layout, and then they give it to somebody who, can't see very well, and they've just gone in and set their text size to largest.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, boy, this page looks like crap.
Yep. I can't read it.
I had a guy at one point telling me how the validation controls just don't work right. And I said, well, what's wrong with them that they don't work right? He said, well, there's a property that's supposed to allow them to collapse in, and it just doesn't work. And what he was doing was using grid layout. So, of course, it positioned the validation control absolutely, and it wouldn't let it collapse into the side of the control.
Yep.
What do you think about smart navigation? The smart navigation property.
Yeah. I mean, we've used it when we knew that the target was IE, obviously, because that's the only thing you're going to really do.
Yeah. Well, I think Netscape 6 supports it now, doesn't it?
Yeah, the browser has to support iframes as the require.
Actually, we had some problems though with smart navigation and Netscape.
Ah.
So even on Netscape 6, we did have it. Didn't always get there.
Well, I'll tell you what is a problem is if you have a list box on your form, it's going to refresh and redraw anyway.
Right.
And that's problem number one. I also ran into a couple of weird problems that I don't remember. I just remember they didn't make any sense. And I turned smart navigation off and everything worked fine. So
yeah.
I guess my gut feeling is that if you're writing for IE only, that's great. But if you're writing for IE only, that means they have Windows, that means they have IE. The latest version, they should just install the framework and you should write a Windows app. So that's all I got to say about that. But
yep. No, I mean when we've done it, we were targeting IE only, so we knew that we could use that, and so we used it, and it does speed stuff up a little bit.
Hey, does your company have a group of 8 or more developers that are fluent in VB4, 5, or 6, or maybe even VB3, and you're looking to move to VB.NET or ASP.NET, and you're really sort of throwing around a lot of different options? Well, listen, Mark Dunn and myself both do on-site training. We will customize a class for you. We'll bring our laptops. If you can get a conference room and 8 or more people together, we'll come to you. And we'll customize a class just for your needs. So if you want to focus more on Windows forms or web forms, or maybe you don't even want to do ADO.NET, maybe you want to learn how to write flat files or something like that. Maybe you want to see what are the alternatives to web services. Maybe you want to learn .NET Remoting. Maybe you want to learn multi-threading and all of those things that go along with it. We can do anything. Just give us a call. Go to www.franklins.net, or you can call us toll-free at area code 877-273-4838. Talk to my man Todd Collinsby, and he'll set you up. Now let's get back to this incredible show where Paul Sheriff is talking to us about where we store connection strings in an ASP.NET application. It gets good and it just keeps getting better, folks. Stick around.
You know, it kind of reminded me of one other thing. I'm going to kind of interject here, but, you know, one of the things that when you talk about performance, you also got to talk a little bit about, okay, where do you store your application variables? I mean, what are you guys using? Are you putting it in web config? You know, are you putting it in the registry? You know, what are you guys doing personally?
Me? For like configuration strings that are sensitive?
Yeah, you know, well, yeah, connection strings, right? You
connection strings.
Where are you storing that stuff?
I'll typically store them encrypted in the config file. And
I actually put some stuff in just XML files on the server.
I have a, whether it's a config file or it's a text file or an XML file, I have a thing that I build into components as a dynamic property, which is a encrypted connection string. So it writes it out encrypted, it reads it in, decrypts it, and uses that.
Right. And then how are you retrieving that data? Are you using the system.configuration, configuration settings.app settings to retrieve that?
I've done it both ways.
Right.
I've done it as a dynamic property.
Okay.
So that
which is using app settings underneath the hood.
Yeah, so exactly, but you don't have to specifically go out and use it.
Right.
I've done that, and I've done app settings. So.
Okay.
And I've also just written it out to a text file.
Okay.
And read it in as a text file. You can do that too. Nothing wrong with text files, folks.
Nothing wrong with that. I just wanted to mention one thing here, okay? Because app settings is actually pretty darn slow, okay? And the reason why it's so slow is because they're actually rereading the web config file every time. And they have to do that because if you ever gone in and changed that dynamically, your web config, and then you save it, and it'll pick it up right away, won't it?
Well, in an ASP application, your web config gets read in whenever it changes.
I'm sorry, at what?
That's what I think Paul just said.
Yeah, and in an ASP app, your web config gets reread whenever it changes.
Okay, but with app settings, it's actually rereading it every single time you hit it. And I found this out because there's another way to do where you're still reading from web config, but it caches everything at one time. Okay, and there's what's called a custom class that you can create that you implement the iConfiguration section handler interface.
Cool.
Okay, now what happens is you actually call a method called getConfig, and you give it the name of the configuration section you want. Okay, and then it'll call your class, and it's got an interface, and there's a create method, and it'll pass the whole XML node to you at one shot, turn it into a name value collection, and you can read them all and cache them in your own local variables.
Cool, man. I did not know that.
Seems like an awful lot of work just to read some data from a file. That's why I'm typically using text files.
Yeah, you set this up one time, and what happens, I mean, because I did some timings on this, and, you know, to read something from app settings takes about 250 milliseconds on average. When I used this custom class, okay, it took 30 milliseconds.
Cool.
It was amazing. And it's not that hard to set up. It's actually documented. Actually, I think I just wrote an article on that.
So on that 64K connection, that must have saved you a lot of time.
Yeah. So, you know, but just little things like that, because that was to me very amazing, because what they do is then they set up a dependency on the web config file so that when it changes, it automatically takes your whole section and passes it to your class again. Says, hey, this area changed. Here you go.
That's very cool.
It is.
Yeah.
So same thing, like a lot of people say, well, for security, my people don't let me put things in the web config, so we had to put it in the registry.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, the registry is fantastic. No problem.
Unless you have to reinstall Windows.
Yeah. But make sure you, again, read it from the registry once and then cache it, because reading from the registry, 650 milliseconds on average.
Oh, yeah. Registry's slow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, things like that can just really make a big difference. I mean, you know, when we're talking about performance, right?
Oh, that's
so what's the downside to reading and writing directly to a text file, which we all agreed was okay?
Well, again, what you want to do is read that one time, right, and cache it. Now, this is where that cache object can come in very handy, right?
Exactly.
One of the things you can do on a cache object is you can set up a dependency so that if that text file changes, it'll invalidate the cache, and you can have a callback method that you can put on that, and guess what? It'll read it back in.
Cache is awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
It is really cool.
And I don't think Java has cache, does it? I don't think it does. J2EE.
I wouldn't know.
We don't have any Java experts here, so that's why we're drawing a blank.
We'll have to get Pat Hines back on the line.
According to
that
Pat, they doesn't have that.
Yeah.
At least at this taping, anyway.
Yeah.
You mentioned security. Are there other security concerns with ASP.NET?
Well, that is, again, a lot of things that you need to think about, and kind of what we talked about right here, right, with, making sure you're encrypting your connection string in your web.config file. Okay, that's a good practice. Obviously, you can put it in the registry. That's more secure. Okay.
I stay away from the registry wherever possible.
Amen,
brother. Yeah, but you know what? There are a lot of good reasons to use it, and I think if you do it effectively, you can use that. But
a big problem is, if you have to repave your machine, those settings are gone.
Yep.
So you have to have a way to, you have to write some extra code to pull all your settings out of the registry and store them locally and put them back in if you need to. And then, that brings up the issue, well, then why use it at all? So,
right.
Unless you want to, you really want to hide something.
Yeah.
That's a good place to hide things.
Right.
But not very accessible.
Well, one of the major things, though, and one of the big arguments that security experts, we went through this because we've been doing some work with some banks, okay, and their security auditors came in, and they absolutely forbid us from putting stuff in the web.config, even though they know that that IIS has got that file so you can't get at it, right?
Right.
But they said it's still a part of the web space, okay? It's still part of that website in the web space, okay?
Yep.
And I like the idea of putting things in a text file. So what we did, okay, this is kind of a cool technique. You might want to think about this. Create an XML file, put it in a different folder outside of the web space.
Outside the web space.
Right? Then you use ACL and lock that baby down so only a certain user can get at it, right?
Yeah.
Then you can put your connection strings in there.
Access control list. That's what I'm the acronym police.
I'm sorry, yes. Okay. Now, the problem is you can't open that folder up to the ASP.NET user, which is the security context under which we run, right, in an ASP.NET web app. Okay? But guess what? The old tricks that we used to do still work. There's an API call you can make to say log on user and actually run as a different user for a short amount of time. Okay? It's actually documented in the help for .NET. And if you look up log on user, there's an API call, and then look up Windows, what is it? This class is Windows impersonation.
Yeah.
And what they do is they allow you to impersonate a real user for a short amount of time, and then you can revert back to who you were before.
You have to pass the password in?
Yeah, user ID and password that you put in your code. Okay, so that way it can be just a special ID and password, kind of a golden user type of thing, right?
Right.
Log on in him temporarily in your running code, and then you pass over, you get the data out of there, okay, and then you revert back to the ASP.NET user.
That's very cool. Nice technique.
So that's one of the techniques that we had to use because, obviously, working with a bank, they're very secure about things like that.
Hey, Fats, you going to die or what?
Yeah, I'm having a coughing fit. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. Sorry, Paul.
No, that's cool.
Yeah, I'm better now.
You sure?
Boy.
Yeah.
You going to drink some
I
whiskey?
felt that way over here in California.
Yeah. Better bring me a bucket.
Drink a little bourbon. That'll clear that right up. Have a little gumbo. I'm getting in the mood for New Orleans because we're going down there to Dev Connections in about a month or so.
Oh, that's right. Dev Connections coming up.
Yeah. Going to have some fun down there.
Yeah. That's a good conference. I haven't been at that one in a couple of years. So.
Are you going to this one?
I'm not. I wasn't able to make it this time. I'm going to be. I'm doing something else on that one.
Oh, well, anyway. Sunny Day is going to be at our booth down there. He's going to be doing magic and juggling and stuff.
All right.
So if you're down there, stop on by. And I've handpicked a lot of great talks for the VB track. So I really want people to show up and say hi. We were thinking about having a .NET Rocks party for listeners anyway.
Hey, cool.
Stay tuned for that.
That'd be cool.
So
I'll get some abstracts into you next time, Carl, and we'll get me on the speaker list for that one.
Absolutely.
I did that 2 years ago. I had a blast. So
yeah. Yep.
It's a good crew down there.
So what do you think VB programmers should be learning? VBNet programmers should be learning? What skills?
Oh, that's a good question. Because I teach a lot too, just like you guys do, and probably to me, the number one thing that they really need to start learning is object-oriented programming.
Yeah. True objects.
I just find that people really don't understand, this concept that we've been talking about here actually is abstraction and wrapping things up into classes, right? I think that's probably one of the skills that
it's an
probably
art.
is most lacking.
It's an art form. It really is. There are times when your hard and fast rules are going to break down, and you have to understand when those are. And it's a balancing act. Absolutely. You can take it too far in any direction.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree. But that to me is probably one of the first areas, To tell you the truth, I think VB.NET programmers need to learn a little bit about C# as well, because there's still a lot of code out there, that's written in C#, and you have to kind of understand the syntax a little bit so you can still read that code and then, of course, translate it to VB.
I completely agree. I've been telling people that. We were just speaking with Andrew Brust. I was last week, and we said the same thing. People should learn how to read C#. VB programmers, VBNet, and you can really do it in an hour or two. You can learn the basic, how to identify code, how to look at code and understand what it's doing, how to follow it. It's really not that different.
Right.
Especially if you've seen any JavaScript or anything. So.
Yeah, JavaScript would be another area, because when you start writing web apps, and not everybody's going to be writing web apps. .NET has an excellent story for desktop applications.
Oh, yeah.
Windows Forms is fantastic.
That's true.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, yeah, it is. And I think, but when you do get into the web space, and I think a lot of VB developers are going to be, that, JavaScript is going to be very important for you. So,
I agree.
And I think one last area is XML.
Yeah.
I think XML, you're going to see it. It's just prevalent all over the place in .NET when you're looking at config files, and it just is. You got to learn the basics of it. You don't have to know every little thing. You don't have to understand everything about an XML data, storage and XSD files. But you need to know enough to really be able to look at it and work with it. And that is an area where case sensitivity comes in again.
Absolutely.
And a lot of VB programmers have a lot of problems with that.
And I think schemas, XSD schemas, are probably the most important thing to understand how to read in XML. The rest of the stuff, it's all pretty much generated. We can look at it and understand it. But schemas are very, very powerful, and they are, as I've said before, the new data contract of the future. We need to really need to see what those things are.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you got any favorite utilities, downloads, fun things, or even third-party products that you really like that you want to share a link with the listeners?
Yeah, I'll try to think of some of the links. Let me bring up my little guy here. Tell you the truth, probably the number one site that I go to is MSDN. I actually go to msdn.microsoft.com, and I do a lot of searching on that. Obviously, I go to Google as well. Sometimes they got better links than Microsoft does.
Right, I usually go to Google first.
Stephen Forte just showed us www.google.com/Microsoft is a Microsoft-centric Google search engine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, anything in the world you want to search at Microsoft, do it through there.
That's cool. So I really do use Microsoft's website a lot. I like God.net, although unfortunately a lot of that's C#.
Yeah.
But I've learned enough about C# that I can still work my way through the samples. But they have a lot of good samples.
They do. Yep, they have a lot of great samples.
And some good downloads. Their whole menu system on the God.net site you can actually download and use.
Have you seen .NET 247 or 24/7?
Yep.
That's a good community.
Yep, been there as well.
How about vbcity.com?
I haven't been to that one.
Yeah, check it out. It's pretty good.
Okay.
I would say there's a lot of intermediate, even beginner intermediate people there, but there's some really advanced discussions as well. They got a great VB.NET forum there.
Well, that's good, yeah. Because I think we really need some more VB.NET sites out there, VB-centric. So
funny you should mention that. You guys remember the old Carl and Gary's website?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm doing a new site, and I'm not saying that it has anything to do with Carl and Gary's, because it doesn't. It's a whole Franklin's Net site. But it is going to be Carl's VB.NET homepage, and it's going to be the same kind of categorized lists of resources elsewhere on the Internet. So while there's not going to be any content there, I hope to make what will eventually become the search engine or the list of resources for VB.NET programmers on the web.
Your one-stop shop.
Yeah. So we're going to give it a shot. We have a little bit of seed money from Microsoft. They helped us out. Thanks to Eric Ewing.
Cool.
Shout out there. And it's not up yet, but it will be soon, and stay tuned for that.
Well, that's great. Eric's a good guy.
So have you used any alternate environments besides VisualStudio.net? There's a couple out there. I know Delphi is coming out with one.
Right.
There's also one. Mark, help me out here. The same guy that did the utility we were talking about just about a month ago. I can't remember what it was now. Oh yeah, it was the XML comment creator.
Right.
Those guys have an environment for.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a programming environment for .NET.
Wow.
I don't know if it's free or not, but I'll try to find.
I haven't used any. I mean, I looked at WebMatrix.
Yeah.
Which, to me was like, well, gosh, if I got VisualStudio.net, why?
Right.
Well, it does everything in line, so if your goal was to write in line, it would be useful.
I guess. I really can't see the benefit of writing in line versus code behind it. I mean, there's really no performance benefit. It's like you're going back to ASP days. It's like, why?
Yeah, it's for the people who are, TextPad centric. Let's say, Notepad centric.
Right.
Yeah.
You might want to check out my website. You can sign up for my newsletter. I do have a monthly newsletter that I send out with tips and tricks on .NET.
Great.
And then I have a tips and tricks folder as well. And it's like every time I speak at a user group or anything I come up with, I just put it up on my little tips and tricks site.
Web is fantastic, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It's fantastic.
Are you still doing videos these days, Paul?
Yeah, I am. I'm actually doing them with a new company called Blast Through Learning, and it's actually blastthroughlearning.com.
Great.
And actually, I teamed up with Allison Balter and another buddy of mine, Bruce Jones, and we're all we're using a lot of my courseware and Allison's courseware that we've written on .NET, and just putting all of that down onto videos. It's actually mostly on CDs these days, obviously. You just plug it into your computer and watch right online. So,
do more people buy videotapes or CDs?
It's about 50-50 still.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
I kind of would have expected it to kind of shift over by now.
Yeah.
To CDs, but it's still about 50-50.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Any plans to do DVDs?
I think in the future, but right now they're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it's fun. I really enjoy doing that. I really enjoy teaching. I really enjoy getting, the word out on things. I write a lot of articles, and I speak at conferences and seminars all over the place. And to me, it's just a lot of fun. And, as you guys know, when you teach, you learn more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Hey, Paul, did you hear the news that Yanni and Kenny G and John Tesh died in a fiery plane accident?
No, I hadn't heard that.
It's not true. It's just one of those wouldn't it be nice kind of things.
Yeah, exactly. Just would have been a big yawn anyway.
Yeah,
whatever.
Well, any last-minute wisdom you want to impart to the teeming millions?
Oh, boy. If you haven't gotten into .NET yet, what are you waiting for?
That's right.
We love .NET. It rocks.
It's real.
It is.
It's real, and here's the deal, man. Saving time and money is what it's all about.
That's right.
Yeah. It's about working smarter.
Our productivity really increase incredibly once we started using this.
It's about working smarter. It's about doing less code to do the same thing.
Well, I tell students .NET will make you look smarter.
Absolutely.
Yep, I agree.
You'll spend less time in front of your CRT, so your eyes won't be bloodshot.
You can wash your hair once in a while.
You can wash your hair well, only if you're using VBNet, right?
Right.
You can notice that Paul has nice fluffy hair.
That's right.
Still
got it.
He has
time. Age, but I still got it.
He has time to bathe every day, as do we. All right, you guys. We're going to wrap it up here. So thanks for being on the show. Man, just an incredible resource of information you are, and thank you.
Well, thanks, guys. Hey, this has been fun, and maybe we'll do it again sometime in the future.
Oh, we'd love to, Paul. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, all right. Take care, guys.
And say hi to Ken for us.
Will do.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Good night. Good night.